Welcome everyone to our Summit Series session on the trials and triumphs of complaint handling. I'm Wade Schrader, Medical Device Guru at Greenlight Guru. A bit of housekeeping as we get started. You can use the Q&A Zoom feature to ask questions at any time to our panelists. We will get to a few of them during the session and after as well. But we'll also follow up this live event with the recording. And if we can't get to your questions, we'll get some additional comments from our panelists to provide to you later. We have an amazing senior group here today, and I would like to give them a chance to introduce themselves. So we'll just go in order. Murtuza, if you want to go first, and then Joanne and Anne after that.
Sure, thanks, Wade. Hi, everyone. My name is Murtuza Buhari. I work for Canterbury Scientific in Christchurch, New Zealand, as a quality and regulatory manager. We design, develop, and manufacture high-quality controls and calibrators for diabetes and hemoglobinopathy assays. We certified to ISO 13485 and have Class 1 and 2 devices under US and Class C devices under EU IVDR. I do have an amazing team of 4 who look after all aspects of QA, regulatory affairs, and process and equipment validation. That's me. Thanks, Wade.
Absolutely. Thank you, Murtuza. Joanne.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joanne LeBrun. I'm Vice President of MDC Associates. We're a consulting firm in Boston, Massachusetts area. We work with primarily in vitro diagnostic devices, IVDs, but also medical devices. MDC does quality systems consulting, so we could help you stand up a quality system, improve your quality system, help you through audits, et cetera, as well as regulatory consulting to be able to get products approved. Yeah, looking forward to being here. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Joanne. And to round us out, Anne.
Hello, I'm Anne Holland, CEO of QA Consulting. I've worked in medical devices. We don't focus on in vitro diagnostics, however, so it's nice that we have some blend here. I've worked in quality, regulatory, and microbiological services. Those are our 3 pillars, and we've done that for over 20 years now.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you all for those introductions. And we know everyone listening has different backgrounds as well as varied roles in the industry. Our State of Medical Devices 2022 benchmark survey uncovered data from over 500 professionals across the medical device industry, hitting on a variety of topics. One of those key themes that we saw, that we identified gaps for, was complaint handling in the industry. So let's go ahead, get this started off by pulling up some metrics about our quality events. So I'm going to share my screen here with some results from our survey here. So one thing we'll notice, our survey discovered a gap to be filled when it comes to pre-market companies feeling like they were able to measure the results of their quality initiatives. 75% feel that they are either still developing the skill or that they are ineffective at that skill. So to the panelists here, and we'll start out with Anne here. What would be your definition of what it means to measure the results of quality initiatives?
Well, what we do is we develop KPIs, or key performance indicators, throughout the quality system, and complaints is one of those areas. Some examples of complaint quality initiatives would be, times to close a complaint. How about the associated investigation? How thorough is that? How long does that take? And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is how many of the devices that you hear complaints about actually get returned and analyzed or investigated. So those are some of the key indicators I would look at for the quality skills, for the quality complaint area.
Nice. Yeah, those are great. And Joanne, any others that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think in addition to all of those awesome ideas, I also tend to advise people to also have the ability to do trend analysis, so that you have an idea of where you are, where you're going, where you've been, to be able to look at some of those quality initiatives as well. So what nonconformances have you had? What complaints have you had? What CAPAs, deviations, and be able to kind of look at that in a little more granulated way as well. So it's kind of a nice two-pronged approach there.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I like that a lot. And for you, Murtuza, what advice do you have for companies who don't feel confident, this percentage that feel that it's ineffective or they're still developing this skill? What advice would you have for them?
I would tell them that they have to start somewhere. It doesn't have to be perfect to begin with, and you can always improvise, as you learn along the way. And to be honest with you, it's also a requirement of clause 8.4, I think, of ISO 13485, to actually, look at your data, analyze, and take actions accordingly. So yeah, you have to begin somewhere and then improvise along the way.
I think that's a really good point, Murtuza. And I think one thing that I've seen companies make a mistake in, honestly, is not collecting data. It's very hard to make a decision or to even understand a problem if you don't have the data collected and you don't have data to look at. And so yes, the FDA and ISO expect you to write everything down, because if it isn't written down, you didn't do it, and all of those things. But, I think the more value add is to be able to have the data to look at it so that you can see where things are going, and to set a system up to be able to capture that data is so important. And I see that kind of lacking in some of the companies I work with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And yeah, that was actually a follow-up question I was going to have, is how does this data then relate to successful complaint handling? And yeah, it sounded like you answered that. I don't know, any more to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much data at your fingertips, and sometimes it's like, wow, do we have to collect all the data and figure out what's going to be valuable for us? But for sure, in complaint handling, you don't have a choice. It's compulsory, right? So, when you're looking into complaints, all complaints need to be investigated. All complaints need to be reviewed to see if there's going to be a reportable event. And then, as you're doing your investigation, what's your purpose of your investigation? Is to confirm that complaint, and then take actions from there and determine whether or not you need to take more field actions. So that in itself is really important, but collecting your data, even in your just like your manufacturing and your quality control and things like that, is so important, because if you don't have a distinct batch record, or if you don't have like all of the activities that happened in that batch record, doing that investigation might be limited. Or you're just not going to have the information that you think you're going to have. So sometimes, looking at that from a complaint standpoint is real important, because of course you got to look at your batch record during a complaint investigation to see if anything funky happened, and look at your trends from there. So if you don't have that information, you're really missing a large portion of what you're trying to do there.
I would add the pre-market companies also. There's so many other sources but complaints. You need to look at your audits, go out to trade shows, get initial feedback from the customers or the doctors. You have to come up with a clinical evaluation report, at least if you're going to the EU. There's all kinds of, look at the risk assessment. And the feedback between the complaints and your risk assessment is something that almost every company can improve. So there's not only just a few things that you should do to gather data and trend, but look at all the areas of feedback.
I think you're right, Anne. And I think the other thing that comes to mind when you say that is just, that your ability to be able to recognize that starts from day zero. maybe even day -1, so that you can, you can identify what are your market requirements, something that a lot of people don't gather. So what are they expecting, out of your device, and are you providing that? Because that's going to become a complaint later. And so if you sort of skip over that market requirements or user requirements feature, you could miss out there, and you're not going to anticipate getting some of those complaints as well, to Anne's point. So I think that, the more work you do there, and the more you have that literature search, market search, competitor search, even just the workflow in which your device is going to be used, that's huge. Who's going to use it, who's the user, what are the conditions that it's going to be used in. If you have that all defined, you're going to have a better sense of what's going to happen in the end.
Yeah, definitely. We did have a question come in about this. So it is from Pamela. She says, all complaints necessarily mean something is wrong, or can complaints also be areas of enhancement, patent amendments, ineffective explanations? Do you mind, providing some insight into that? Yeah, go ahead, Joanne.
Happy to. So there are, instances where that's complaints and instances where that's not. And so, there is a definition. There's kind of the classic definition by the FDA of what a complaint is. I think everybody kind of sticks with that one because it's pretty detailed, and that includes reliability, identification of the device, as well as just, did it not, is it showing signs of not being safe or effective? Sometimes there's confusion as to, well, we went to the FDA and we showed that our device was effective 95% of the time. Do we have to take it as a complaint that it's not effective those other 5%? And so you really sort of need, that's where all that measurement comes into play, to be able to know if your instructions are unclear. That for sure is a complaint to consider. Do you have to react every single time? Not necessarily, but that's where trend analysis comes into play. Did one person say it was difficult to understand, or is everybody calling in saying it was difficult to understand? Depends on your user case, right? Is it an over-the-counter product? Or is it something that a professional is going to use? That's a way different user case. And so to be able to come up with those measurements is really important there too. Like, what do you expect to have happen, and how are you going to treat that as a complaint? But I would go with the classic definition of the complaint, and then look at the context of your device to be able to look at more than that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I like how you tied it back to the trending and the, measuring the quality analytics there.
It's all related. Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome. So yeah, we'll move on here to some other results we had from our study. And with this, we discovered that the top 2 challenges that companies face when it comes to complaint handling are inadequate training and an inadequate complaint management solution. So let's start with discussing the inadequate training. Start with you, Murtuza. So what does effective training look like as it pertains to complaint handling in the industry?
Yeah, Wade, I would say that you need to understand the requirements of complaint handling per ISO 13485, and also the regulatory requirements of the countries that you supply in or trying to supply into. Once you've established that, you need to read and understand the complaint process that you have in your organization. Then I would say you need to go through some of your customer complaints that your organization has dealt with in the past. Hopefully you have somebody who could help you with that process. And at the end of this, then you should hopefully be able to be comfortable enough to know the complaint handling process. And by that I mean the intake when it comes in, the triaging. So what is the priority based on its impact to the end user, determining, like Joanne said, if a regulatory reporting is required, investigating, closure, or escalation and recall. So yeah, that's how an effective training should look like in my mind.
Yeah, Martusa, the other thing that I've seen as well, you touched on it, is identifying a complaint, making sure that customer service understands what like a potential complaint is. Maybe they won't say what a complaint is, but how to elevate a conversation with a customer to that complaint situation. I find sometimes, like, I call it front of the house, but I guess that's a hangover from restaurant days. But how does the front of the house identify those? And even in a trade show, if you have salespeople who are standing on a trade show floor and someone walks up to you and says, I have an experience with your device and this is what it is, that's still a complaint. It does say oral communication in the regulations. So, you really have to sort of emphasize that with people as to how to identify that complaint. And I find the front of the house sometimes doesn't get it, and then they get buried. And how is quality going to know about them unless they get brought to quality's attention? Because, a lot of times we'll set something up, and it depends on your company, of course. So it may not be appropriate for everybody, but to review the call logs or the communication logs to make sure that you're finding that hidden gem that would be a complaint. Maybe it's not a gem, but let's go with that word, to be able to identify the complaint. And the other thing too, getting back to the instructional thing, is that, again, if one person has a problem with instructions, it's not the biggest complaint that you have to deal with. But if you find that you're getting a trend and you're really seeing like, wow, people really don't understand this instruction, you do need to respond, particularly if it's OTC. Over the counter. And so, or even sort of point of care. That's another avenue where, reviewing that information is real important to be able to get there. But I totally agree with you, Matusa. I think the way that investigation is done, and even the paradigm of thought, I know that's kind of odd to say, but, if you're a company that's going to have 700 SKUs, a variation of what your device is, you don't want to just fix one device. You want to be able to respond across the board. And if you don't look at it systemically, whatever the issue is, the people who are auditing you and regulating you are going to have a problem with that. Like, how can you prove that it didn't affect this one too? So sometimes we get our blinders on and just look at one product and fix that one product. But all products have that component or have that process or have that whatever to be able to fix. So I'd say to broaden your scope too. Maybe it's not in the complaint per se, but to lead to a CAPA, to be able to take a more systemic, because the whole idea, yes, take care of the complaint, which is not provide them more supplies or provide them more devices for free.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does not resolve the complaint. It resolves a complaint for your salespeople and everybody's happy and they move on. But from a quality regulatory standpoint, that is only just that's not even in the field. That's sidelines activity. So that's a different situation. You're posed with the technical aspect of the complaint. What's going on? What do you got to do about it? And then how do you prevent it from happening again? And has it happened so much that you really do need to do that? One thing, Martusa, I would imagine that you deal with is, unless everything's lyophilized for your product, is leaking. And so how much leaking do you allow? And leaking happens, right? And so it's like, well, usually you set that, as Anne was talking about, you set that specification to say, okay, if anything goes beyond 0.05%, we're going to take action. So then you have that specification in mind from your process validation, what you're going to allow to be acceptable in that regard. So, everybody's got their issues. Everybody has unique issues, just as many people as there are on the planet. We all have different issues. And so you'll have those in your company as well. But I think that's a lot about what happens in training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and making sure people understand their roles in that whole process of, customer service all the way through engineering, whoever's investigating it. Yeah, the training from that front. So then, Anne, for you, because I'm sure you've worked with quite a few people to help them train on their complaint system. What's been successful training for the companies you've worked with? And are there certain forms of training that are better than others?
Well, I think most people do well with hands-on training. So we could do, of course, training to the regulations, whether it's a PowerPoint or in-person training, but then going through some examples with the folks using their tools and their workflow so that nothing gets lost, and that you make sure that your procedures, I think there's a big element of company culture in each complaint system. A couple of things that often are not properly trained to is, Joanne, you hit on it, it's a device, if there's a malfunction or a malfunction with a similar device, that's important. So they forget that. Or if in fact, one of my pet peeves is about, they say that there's a serious injury, but they try to get a cause and effect relationship. That's not what the regs say. It says, may have occurred. It doesn't say the doctor has sent it back and I proved it broke. So there's so many things in the company culture that could have been passed down that people don't go back and check and say, does our process meet the regulations? And those types of things really do get you in trouble later on.
Yeah, I think another thing that gets tricky in dealing with complaints is that if you can't duplicate the complaint, but yet you have photographic, videographic, or otherwise evidence that it did occur, something broke, they have a picture that it occurred. Can you say that's a confirmed complaint, or can you move on from it? And that's always really difficult because, by law, you're expected to keep retention samples unless you justify some reason why not. If you're making ginormous medical devices, Anne can definitely speak to that because that's not my expertise, but I'm kind of more talking about like on the, let's just say the widget side of things, right? We make 1 million devices a month. And with each lot, you're required to keep retention samples. Those retention samples, first of all, have got to be segregated. They're not stale samples. They're not the stuff you're doing your stability on. They're not anything else. They have to be segregated for investigative purposes. How many do you need? That question always comes up. And to me, my answer is always, what do you do for QC? And so you should have enough so at least you could repeat QC at least once, but you got to test your retention samples. Sometimes it's destructive, sometimes it's just visual. So you have an advantage. You can use them a couple times in a row, maybe. But it's really important to be able to do that to confirm your complaint. But that's not everything. Again, if there's photographic evidence, you kind of have to say it's there and then assume that, yes, there is that issue. We can't duplicate it, but here's what we're going to look at to be able to take that corrective action. So yeah, there's a lot to complaints. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of debate. There's a lot of, the investigative tools I think are key, to make sure that you identify your variables and really get down to the root cause of what happens. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note of reviewing, we actually have a question here from Poe about this, reviewing the complaints. Is it a good idea to have a cross-functional team to review these complaints? And how often should the cross-functional team review these challenges? What's the best practice you've seen with cross-functional teams and complaints?
I believe strongly in cross-functional teams. Absolutely, because everyone knows a different aspect. You want to include, if possible, your design team, your manufacturing or operations folks, your quality folks, regulatory, and, maybe someone in the sales department, because they're out there in the field, they understand. But, one thing that's not okay is they say, oh, don't have the lot number, so we're not going to investigate. We didn't have it back, so we don't investigate, or, no part, investigation closed. Those are things that I see all the time. And it's hard for me to go back. Then you have to retrain. Then you have to go back and say, no, but getting the team together, you get the generation of ideas that can contribute to, oh, this could have been wrong. And you actually could find the sequence of events that could cause that failure that you wouldn't get necessarily if you just had, a QA tech looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, completely agree with you, Anne. We do a cross-functional meeting to begin with when a customer complaint rolls in. And then at the end of the customer complaint, we have everyone in the team, cross-functionally to review and approve the customer complaint. So like Anne said, everyone like science, design and development team, you can have a member from production, from sales and marketing, and one of us in the quality and regulatory team.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the other thing that's, the cadence question is kind of hard to answer because it really depends on what you're doing. Again, if you're selling them over the counter and you're getting complaints every day, then that's a different review cadence than if you're selling a ginormous piece of equipment that's filling a room. Hopefully you're not getting a complaint every day. So I think it depends on the sheer number and the volume that you're getting and how much discussion needs to happen. I've seen the meeting weekly, I've seen it monthly. I think the important thing about that meeting though is that you're still striking while it's hot. If you let it get stale and this is a complaint from last year, we're still investigating it, it kind of doesn't matter anymore. And so, you didn't act quickly. And one thing that I find in audits is that when we were talking about measurables and KPIs and things like that, is how quickly you get on, you address your complaints. And personally, I try to push back on that from an audit standpoint, because it really depends on what we're doing and how we're going to do an investigation. However, there are some really critical time points to be able to capture that information. I mean, as Anne said, if there's no lot number, that doesn't mean you don't investigate. You've got sales records, or your distributors have sales records. And so you can kind of figure it out, or you can just figure it out. Like, when did you receive it? All right, you're using it now. Let's go back and figure out what lots we made during that time. It really depends on what your process is. But, to put it off too long, things get stale and then you don't have the context anymore. So you want to make sure that you're really talking about them as real time as possible without just having, a team talking about complaints all the time. So it really depends on what you've got going on. But I agree. I think having that review board is really, really important. That sort of complaint handling unit, as it were, is not just quality assurance and quality control. That complaint handling unit is a cross-functional team to be able to really reason that through, because the perspective is everything. And everybody has that different perspective, as Anne said.
Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate that, and appreciate the question too. Moving on here to the second one, because this actually ties in really well, not only having the cross-functional team and training, but a solution to help you with the complaint management can be really helpful. And that's the second biggest challenge we see here from our survey, is not having an inadequate complaint management solution. So I guess we'll start with you, Anne. From your point of view, what makes a solution a good complaint handling solution, and what should that solution provide to make it seamless and effective?
Well, I think there's a number of good solutions. Manual solution is hard to manage. So if you get, like Greenlight Guru, and you have a good workflow that you've established, that is a good solution. But there's a ton of them out there, and you can still do it well without a fancy complaint management system, especially if you're just a startup or in the product development. You don't need to have the fanciest, most expensive. But I think the best solutions are ones that provide the linkage between the complaints, the trends, the returns, and the non-conformances. So you can go in there, get a complaint batch records, pull that up, do all of that analysis quickly, and get that preliminary information so that the investigation can get started. Sorry.
That was a cool little symphony that you just had there. That was cool. That was awesome. I know, I totally agree. I think that any system, as Matusa said, that there's a sequence of events that happens with complaints, right? You get the receipt of the complaint, you get the information about the complaint, you figure out what the reportable issues are. Was there a chance that somebody was harmed during the issue? And that's not admitting fault. by the way. That's
Right.
just, was somebody harmed using your device? There's no admission of fault when you do a reportable event. Just to say that out loud. FDA says the same. And then from there is where the work really begins, right? So you're going to do your investigation. What's your investigation plan? How is that going to work? I think an effective complaint system, regardless of how it works, whether it's, you know, a spreadsheet or what, is to manage each of those steps. And again, not let them die. Because as soon as they die, you're not going to get to the point where you're managing those complaints anymore. And then as an auditor, we go in, we look at your complaint log. I'll talk about a complaint log because I think that's like the key to everything. Look at the complaint log. Oh, this one's been open since last year. What complaint am I going to look at? That complaint, because it stands out, right? So I think a complaint log is really necessary unless you have an electronic system like Greenlight Guru, to be able to remind you and to be able to show you this field is still open, it's still due. I like assigning due dates, not to be able to, you know, for the KPIs is awesome if you do that as well, but so you can have something to manage. Hey, this is coming up. Have you gotten this done? What are we doing about it? What, you know, just communication, right? Getting that going. I think the other aspect of complaints, which is a little bit different for IVDs, I think, but I could be wrong, is that I like to start the complaint process early. So the law is that you have to start at commercialization, right? You can't not do complaints once you have commercialization. I personally like the practice run of your clinical studies. And, you know, if you don't have clinical studies, then it's a little bit less to concern with, but that is usability, depending on how you're doing your clinical studies, of course. But if you're doing something in the field, that's your initial view of usability. That's your initial view of market acceptance. That's your initial view of workflow if you haven't done the homework beforehand. And so if you don't handle those as complaints, number one, you're not going to have practice at your system. And number two, you're just going to be surprised in the end. And so I definitely recommend that you use that opportunity to begin to process your complaints.
Definitely. Yeah. And actually that leads into the next thing that I wanted to talk about here is, you know, post-market feedback is really critical, but you also have the pre-market feedback. And you gave a little bit there. I know, Murtuza, I'm sure you've been through it too. How do you suggest companies start gathering some of that pre-market feedback that Joanne was talking about?
Yeah, so design verification and design validation is a very good place to get pre-market feedback. I mean, as you know, design verification is more bench testing and paperwork exercise, so you might not get as much data as you need. But design validation, absolutely, because you might have to also do human factors engineering that Joanne touched on previously. So that is where you would definitely get some of that pre-market feedback.
And even during your design phases, right? I mean, when you're doing your design plan and your design inputs, what's necessary? What do you really, what problem are you trying to solve, and where are you going with this, and what are your requirements too? I think those really sort of follow through to all of those end results, right? Because you're going to have a trace matrix. What are your inputs? And then you're trying to prove those and come up with what do we deem acceptable, so that you can then judge the information that you get. Again, it all comes down to data. If you don't have the data, it's really hard to analyze. So yeah, I think it's really important to know where you are at that point. And yeah, don't forget about usability. Usability is huge. I've actually been working in my own department and with our clients lately, and just sort of brushing up on that. You know, there's a lot of talk about usability with COVID and things like that, but overall, you know, if that's a guaranteed complaint, you know, invalid results or invalid use, and if you take the time to really look at the risk analysis, as Murtuza said, I think it was Murtuza or Anne, you know, look at your risk analysis, what could go wrong, and then be able to identify that. I think the other thing too is reflecting that risk analysis when you're going through your complaint analysis, right? So you look at your complaint and say, did we even think this was going to be on our risk? Risk analysis is a forecast. It's a total guess. right? Before you go to market. It's what you think is going to happen. You probably have a little data from other products you might have engineered, but it's kind of a guess. And so what's expected is that you follow that through. Was it as bad as we thought it was going to be? Was it as common as we thought it was going to be? You know, all of those different aspects to be able to update your risk management so that you can analyze your data better as well. So there's kind of two, it's kind of bookends for market needs, user needs, and stuff like that.
And I would say on the risk analysis, I totally agree with you. And another thing, if you pick the like trending codes or complaint codes from that risk analysis, that way it does build that bridge, and you can link them back, and then you can highlight the complaints that are of higher risk and fast track those, especially if you have a product like an implant. I worked once that all of a sudden one region was having all kinds of infections. So we were able to figure out quickly, you know, because it was such a high risk thing, what was going on with, you know, say this handful of clinics, and link it back to like look at the sterilization load, look at the bioburden, look at all of those things associated with that product. So if you can fast track the high risk ones, that's awful critical.
Yeah, it's totally going to feed in, right? So you do your risk analysis, and, you know, even if all of your risks are acceptable, you still know which ones rate the highest. And so, you know, that's some of the expectation, is that you're really going to look at those. You're going to do that benefit risk analysis, and you're going to be able to figure out, yeah, we need to watch these because these are the big ones. And then absolutely set up your trend categories so that you can have good trending data. And then you know ahead of time what data you're going to collect, so that you can keep tabs on it. Yeah, absolutely. And then there's the surprises, like the infections. Yeah. Which are cool too.
Okay.
Yeah, this is all great. I stopped sharing our data here. I figure we're past talking through those results. Yeah, on the continuing on with that, so pre-market and then getting into the post-market, what are some of the channels that you recommend getting the feedback from in post-market after launching the product? We'll start with Anne there. You're still highlighted on my screen.
Okay. I was going to give someone else a chance. Well, I think there's, you know, several categories. First, there's internal sources of data, you know, your CAPAs, your maintenance, your sales folks, your marketing folks. There's all kinds of people out there in the field, and it's so important that they are trained in what's a complaint. Yes, it's written or oral expression of dissatisfaction. So if they just go out to say a clinic and they don't report it back, you're missing a lot of data. Also from customer surveys, most of us do some sort of customer survey to show satisfaction. You can glean information from them. Audits, both internal and second party or third party audits. So, you know, internal audits are friendly fire. Ask about information. Ask about what they think this system is, or if it's missing anything. We already talked a little bit about literature reviews. We talked about trade shows. There's also databases. You can go look at MAUDE database, see, oh, look at that. There have been so many reported in this one thing for competitive products. So it's just a ton of different data sources that should be looked at, rather than just, oh, we've only had 2. So that's good, right?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because you know, the amount of information available to us is huge these days. For those of you who are as old as me, you know, that's very special. And so, you know, before we were just all operating in our own little universe. And so there's a lot of information out there, but it's not all out there yet. So like the MAUDE database is great to be able to get that. The FDA is ahead. I was going to make a joke and say Unimed was the place to look because it's not up yet, right? So the whole idea is that there'll be a database where all that stuff can be looked at. You know, who has had a reportable event on this device? How many infections were there? How many deaths were there? Whatever occurred. And so, you know, that's really important information. Up until now, it has been, well, where'd you sell it? Go to that member state's database in Polish and try to figure out if there's any reportable events. That was virtually impossible. And so that's the creation of UDMed. And so that's starting to come up, blogs of all things. And I know that's a drag, but if you're in the diabetes space, you are victim to blogs. And so, it's really important to know what is going on out there. And if it's not your control, it's somebody else's control, but you still, you are expected to learn from that, especially in the ISO standpoint, where, you need to look at your competitors, you need to look at similar devices. And when you do your searches, not only do you need to look at that, but you also need to recognize and document how you're doing your search. What are your keywords that you're searching? How are you doing those searches? Where are you going for that? Because that gets looked at too. Because obviously, if you don't scratch the surface, you're not going to get any information. So they want to make sure that you're scratching that surface, and they want to know how you're doing that. So there's the amount of information is huge. What we tend to advise is that you have for your product. It can't be a general approach for everybody because it's so different. But where are your sources of data? Control that. Create a form that forces everybody to go to each one of those sections and do that summary, not just, we'll gather all your data and make a decision. That is not going to help anybody get this done. And because they don't know, they're not going to do it. And so then there's no compliance at all. So we tend, even management review, which I know we're not here to look at, but even that, like lay it out so that you have to do that summary in every single category: CAPAs, nonconformances, deviations, complaints, of course, literature search, competitive search, stuff like that, similar product search. And then, did you look in the United States? Did you look in the EU? Did you look in Australia? Did you look in New Zealand? And where is your product sold and what are your issues? Did you look at the blogs? And then the other thing that I know some of the medical devices that I work with are up against too is getting that scientific opinion. So customer surveys, is there a surgeon who you work with? Is there a neurosurgeon that is pretty vocal in the industry, or know that they use a lot of your products and maybe other products that have something to say? And so sometimes you can get sort of an advisory committee thing, or something like that to be able to get important information as well. It really depends on what you do. But I would recommend you control it so you make sure you get the same information from time to time, because if you're a high-risk device, not only do you have to do that post-market surveillance, but then you have to do the PSER to be able to report, do your surveillance reports as well, which come from that. So, you have a lot of requirements there. And if you could standardize it, you're going to do better, because you have to look at last year's compared to the one before. And that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that recommendation to standardize it. That is fantastic. And I know we've covered a lot of different options. Murtuza, any more that you could think of? You're, as Joanne mentioned, in the diabetes space, there's a lot of different options. Are there any more that come to mind that you guys use?
I think we've touched on all the important items there, but I think there would be a couple of others, like reviewing service reports if you service any instruments.
Totally right.
Totally right. Might get some key information if you do that. Possibly if you start looking at data obtained during your post-market performance follow-ups that you do, and that's also a requirement of IVDR now, that you start looking at that data. So I think to bring all of this back, I would personally do a post-market surveillance plan, so that you're planning your activities. Once you've done that, once it's approved, then you do the action. You start gathering data, and then you make a post-market surveillance report at the end of this.
Absolutely.
And service, you're absolutely right, Murtuza. I had that written down. Not only is it a good source of information, but the FDA considers it a critical source of information. So the FDA is very attuned to what are you doing in the field, and what are the trends and things like that, and how do you get your field service techs or whatever you call them, field service associates, to report back into your system so that you know what's going on. Because if they're taking care of complaints and you don't know that, and they're just fixing and saying, this light bulb, this fan, this whatever always does this. If you don't know that, you don't know to bring that up in complaints, and it makes the FDA inspectors crazy. So that is definitely an input to your complaint process, to your post-market process, overall, installation and service, because, things go wrong in installation, even though it's fresh and new and past your QC and released, things still, arrive dead on arrival or have issues during installation. So both of those systems are really important to tie back in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So this might turn into a bit of story time, which is okay. But one of the things we wanted to make sure we asked is, what kind of negative downstream effects could be faced if you don't have proper complaint processes in place? So I don't know if you guys have examples of things that could happen, and you don't have to be specific, name any names or anything like that, but what are some of those things that could go wrong? We'll start with you again, Anne.
Well, other than getting in trouble with the regulators, which is no small thing in and of itself. I forgot your question. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. Basically, what are the negative downstream effects? Like, if you don't have a good complaint management system in place, what are the negative downstream effects of that?
Well, yeah. So you start with the regulators, but if you don't know what the problems are, they're going to persist. And then you're going to have more and more problems for years to come. And you might have to pull the product from the market. You might have to have a market withdrawal or a recall. And, if they cause harm, that's a big problem. I've been working with implants for I don't know how many years. And if you have a patient harm, that can go right into lawsuits. So if you don't address, say, the social media, you don't address complaints from many sources, and you only count those complaints that you have a cause effect. You say, okay, this is caused this directly and I can prove it. Then it's very likely that in some point in time down the road, you could have a lawsuit from so much harm that's damaging people.
Yeah, I mean, that's the definition of negligence, right?
Mhm.
Is something's wrong and you didn't do anything about it, and then something really bad happens. We all know examples of all of those negligent things that can come out there. For you CEOs and executive management out there, negligence is the key thing that can get you in legal trouble. It can get you a new set of bracelets that connect behind your back. And you can be punished for that. So it's that big of a deal if you're not looking at your data and you're just like, well, we didn't really have a good data situation, so we didn't really know this was happening and people died. I mean, that's not acceptable, right? So that's for sure sort of the maximum thing that could go wrong. But Anne's totally right, and I'm sure we've all experienced it. If you don't have a good complaint system, or if you don't have a good feedback system in general, you're all working too hard. And so, if you have that data and you can respond to the data, you don't have to work so hard because you're not chasing every fire and putting every fire out. You know what to expect and how to deal with things. So I think that's kind of like the major thing is, yeah, you could go to jail. And then sort of the, lesser thing is you can avoid some stress and some strain and stay on top of things. And then that middle series is like, the auditors aren't going to like it. And, I always say that CAPAs and complaints are the literally the window to your quality soul. And the first thing that an auditor will ever look at are those two things. How do you deal with your problems? What are your problems? And how do you deal with your complaints? And what are your complaints? And how quickly do you get on them to be able to manage them? And how do you respond to them? Do you have complaints open from last year? This time last year, particularly, do you have complaints open from 2019? I know that sounds crazy, and I hope you're all laughing about it, but I've seen that. So, you need to be careful that you don't just like the hard one you avoid. And you're just like, I don't really want to deal with that one. And so it tends to go away, or like you don't get anywhere. Sometimes, particularly with biologics, there's kind of those mysteries. It didn't work. We're not really sure why. We're going to chalk it up to biologics because we are working with natural things and sometimes they don't want to work, enzymes or whatever it may be. And there are sometimes those mysteries. And you have to be careful that you don't make that a trend too, right? Yeah, that was a mystery. Oh, that was a mystery. Oh, that was a mystery too. Then anybody who's looking at your stuff is going to wonder where your edge to mystery is, right? So, you need to be careful and really look at your trends and is anything obvious. I tend to be guilty to working toward the audit, which, isn't always the best way to live your life. But at the same time, you want to tell a story. You want every file to live as it should, so that you don't have to go, oh yeah, let me get that person in the room. Let me figure out what they remember. I don't remember what happened yesterday, everybody. So the older you get, and the more you can't remember. So you want to write it down. You want to write your thought process down. Like, what were the assumptions that we made, and what were what decisions did we make, and why? So that you can support that when an auditor looks at that file. So as QA and regulatory folks, you really need to look at that when you complete a complaint. You want to make sure that's going to stand on its own, that you don't need to invite the scientist back in, the engineer back in. They may not be there. And so, or to remember what they did, and nothing's worse than vamping in front of an auditor. Oh, I remember what I was thinking. I was thinking that there was this, no one's going to remember what they were thinking. So now you're making stuff up. And what happens when you make stuff up? All right, show me the data. And then you get data and it doesn't back up what you're thinking because you don't remember. All of that is wrong. And that's when that bunny hole, that rabbit hole of audits starts to occur. So you really want to be careful that you write everything down and really get very strict with your employees and the people who are supporting you to document everything. An email is not documentation. This is my thing this week because I've been working with a client. Yeah, I'll find that email later. You're never going to find that email later. You're never going to find that email later. So stop thinking that and commit it to a record. What does that mean? Save it as a PDF and then put it in a file. Put it with that complaint so that you have that evidence there. Never think you're going to find that email again. I have thousands of emails. I can't find those emails ever again. So you want to commit them to do that. Be careful what you use for a whole email string, because sometimes there's little tidbits in that email string that get you in whole bunches of trouble because people just are thinking out loud and they say weird things, and those weird things are not for an auditor's review. So be careful which email you choose as your evidence. But yeah, I mean, you really want to be careful to have a nice honed system. It will be audited. The details will be reviewed, and you might as well have it all together.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So I say the same thing as write for your audience. And during training, I gave a training when I was a young engineer, and I would train the salespeople to say, don't say massive blood spill, say fluid loss of 3 milliliters or something like that. So you need to really train, all across your company how to handle a complaint, and even in your design verification and validations, your process validations, write for your audience. So yeah, searching for that mysterious email just isn't going to cut it.
Yep,
Absolutely.
You're right.
Absolutely. Okay, so do want to start wrapping things up here with our time we have left. So just to kind of summarize, I'm going to go around the horn. I'm going to start with you, Martusa. So get your thinking started now. But based on everything we've talked about today, and anything else you can think of too, what would be the top, we'll say 3 things, it doesn't have to necessarily be 3 if you can't think of 3 things that companies can do right now to help them navigate and start handling their complaints better?
I would say that the organizations need to have people who are actually trained and competent in the customer handling process. If they're not competent, they won't be able to handle, and they won't be able to train other people up in the organization. So that's a key. Secondly, I've had experience with paper-based and electronic systems, and by far electronic systems work for me. So yeah, you need to, according to me, you should probably have an electronic system. And then obviously you need to be proactive. Don't be reactive. And I think we've talked about that too. So, we've had an example recently, based on a post-market surveillance system. While we were gathering data, we identified an issue that was on a device that was already in the field. So instead of actually, not doing anything about it, we reached out to our customers and said, hey, we found an issue. We will have to do something about it. So folks, if you do identify something that's already in the field, don't try to hide it, be proactive, call the customer, get the issue sorted.
That's excellent advice.
Yeah, thank you. And Joanne, yeah, go ahead. You take it away.
So the things for me, I'm going to go in my reverse order, actually, to have a standardized approach to complaints. Make sure you always collect the same information. You know your device well. So, do you need a lot number? Do you need a serial number? Do you need the serial number of another component? Do you need whatever, maybe varied use or something like that? So you want to make sure you're collecting all the same information. Again, I like to have forms. I'm kind of a form girl. Whether it's electronic or paper-based, to make sure that information gets collected. As I talked about, complete files, making sure that everything is in that file, and that a complaint file stands on its own. It can go to a CAPA, that's fine, then the CAPA stands on its own. But that you really thought through all the complaint aspects of things. And then I'd say the last thing, which is probably one of my pet peeves, is disciplined thinking. To be able to truly identify what is your investigation, what are your variables. All too many times, like, you go and you get data and then everybody throws holes in it because, well, there's this variable, this variable, this variable. That data is no longer important. It doesn't tell you anything because there's too many variables. You don't know where you're going with it. So the more disciplined thinking you have, and the more you structure your investigations, the better the information will help you. So I think sometimes that's a challenge that I see working with clients too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And give you a whole minute here, Anne.
Well, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny because they've already covered most of the things. One of the things I would say is, and I do say it to my clients, is the FDA expects MDRs. So don't be afraid of saying there's something wrong with your product, because there's expected to break. It's in your IFU. Things go wrong, just handle them promptly and with a scientific rationale. The other thing is, I think what's so important, in addition on the investigations, is to really get to the root cause and not just, do a diagram, you've got it, or 5 whys, and then you don't look into 4 why 5s and you say, well, this guy no longer works here. That's the answer. I don't know how many times I've seen that. It's like, well, just blame the guy who doesn't work here anymore. And then the other things I think are to make sure that your procedures and policies actually meet the regulations of US and the countries in which you sell. It's still surprising to me when I go in and like, this doesn't even meet the regs, and the last thing is, enforce those workflows. Make sure that they're actually being done correctly. Retrain if you need to. If you need to, and show your work on the electronic forms. Don't just say MDR, yes, no. Go through those questions and show how you've gotten from point A to point B. So I think those are all complementary to what others have said, but those are a few things I try to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's good information. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you all so much. I know we ran a minute over here, but really appreciate you guys taking the time to be on this panel, share all this information. Extremely informative. Hopefully it's very helpful for everyone who joined. Thank you all for joining. If you'd like an attendance certificate, they are available or will be available on Greenlight Guru Academy shortly. Also, if you're interested in further learning opportunities, we're hosting an in-person conference June 6th through 8th in San Diego, California, True Quality 2020. And that's designed to help you learn how to innovate faster, stay ahead of industry changes, and use quality to grow your business. We just extended our best ticket rates for that, but only until March 3rd. So make sure you head over to greenlight.guru/true-quality and lock in your ticket to get the best deal. The next session will start at the same time tomorrow, and that topic will be the path to commercialization. So we hope to see you all there. Thank you again, Joanne, Anne, and Martuza for joining us. And yeah, everybody have a great rest of your day.
Great.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.